Every weekday at 6:30 p.m., she walked through the glass doors of the high-rise like she was part of the shadows, present but unseen. Her cart rattled softly behind her, loaded with spray bottles, microfiber cloths, and a mop that had seen better days. The lobby security guard gave her a tired nod, not because he knew her name, but because she'd been coming at the same time, same day for the past 3 years. She wore a navy blue uniform that had faded from too many washes, and her shoes were scuffed at the toes from hours of walking polished marble floors. Inside the elevator, she pressed the button for the 14th floor without looking up. The ride was quiet, just the hum of cables and the occasional ping as the elevator passed each level. When the doors opened, the office was already emptying out, employees rushing to catch trains, laughing over after-work plans, or still hunched over glowing screens, pretending to work while scrolling through their phones. No one looked at her. Not really. To them, she was just part of the scenery, like the potted ficus in the corner or the framed motivational posters that no one ever read. She started in the kitchenette first. Coffee mugs left in the sink, half-eaten bagels wrapped in napkins, yogurt containers with spoons still stuck inside. She scraped, rinsed, wiped. Her movements were smooth, practiced, nothing wasted. She didn't sigh or mutter under her breath, even when someone had spilled an entire smoothie on the counter and walked away like it wasn't their problem. She just cleaned it, because that's what she was paid to do, and because complaining wouldn't change anything. As she moved through the open workspace, she heard snippets of conversation drifting from the few people still lingering. A group near the windows was laughing loudly about something that happened in a meeting earlier that day. One of them mimicked a voice, high-pitched, exaggerated, and the others roared. She didn't react. She'd heard it before. Not always directed at her, but close enough. Sometimes it was a comment about people who don't belong here or a joke about minimum wage mindset. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the trash can. On the whiteboard she was wiping clean. She wasn't invisible, not really. People saw her, they just chose not to see her. They didn't wonder where she lived or if she had kids or what she dreamed about when she finally got to lie down after a 12-hour shift. They didn't know she woke up at 4 a.m. to pack her daughter's lunch before heading to her first job at a hospital 3 miles away. They didn't know she took the bus in rain, snow, and summer heat because her old car finally gave out last winter. They didn't know she saved every spare dollar for her daughter's community college classes, or that she stayed up late reading financial blogs on her phone, trying to understand terms like equity and portfolio, because she refused to be stuck forever. But none of that showed in her face as she emptied another overflowing bin. Her expression stayed neutral, calm, almost peaceful, not because she didn't feel things, but because she'd learned long ago that showing hurt only gave people more reason to keep hurting you. So she kept her head down, her hands busy, her thoughts private. Once a new intern had actually said thank you when she picked up a stack of papers he'd dropped. She'd nodded, surprised, and said, "You're welcome." He smiled, and for a second it felt like being seen. But the moment passed. The next week, she overheard him laughing along with the others when someone made a crack about the night crew thinking they owned the place. She didn't say anything. She just kept cleaning. The truth was, she loved parts of this job. Not the messes or the disrespect, but the quiet. After 7 p.m., the building settled into a kind of stillness. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In those hours, she felt a strange kind of peace. She'd hum old songs her grandmother used to sing while she wiped down desks or vacuumed under chairs. Sometimes she'd pause at a window and watch the traffic below, imagining all the lives moving through the city, each person carrying their own hidden weight, their own secret battles. She never expected gratitude, but she did hope deep down for basic decency. A good evening, a held open door. A simple acknowledgement that she too was human. Most nights she didn't get it. But she kept showing up anyway, because quitting wasn't an option. Not when rent was due. Not when her daughter needed new textbooks. Not when she'd promised herself years ago that she'd never let pride keep her from doing what needed to be done. That Thursday, though, something felt different. The air was heavier. The laughter from the conference room down the hall was louder, sharper. She could hear the clink of glasses, the thump of a speaker playing music. They were having one of their team-building nights, code for drinking on company time while pretending to brainstorm. She sighed inwardly but kept working. She'd avoid that room until they left. But they didn't leave. At 8:15 p.m., she finally had to go in. The trash bin was full, and someone had spilled soda on the projector table. She pushed the door open slowly, hoping to slip in and out unnoticed. She wasn't fast enough. "Oh, look, it's the cleanup crew," one voice called out, slurring slightly. "Hey, you mind? We're in the middle of a very important pitch," another added, waving a hand like she was a fly to be swatted away. She kept her eyes on the spill. "Just need to wipe this down. Won't take a minute." "Actually," a third voice cut in, smug, amused, "I think janitors need clearance to be in here after hours." "Don't they?" Laughter followed. Not the kind that comes from joy, but the kind that comes from feeling superior. Then someone did an impression, mimicking the way she sometimes greeted people in the hallway. "Evenin', y'all." It wasn't even how she talked, but they laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. One of them tossed an empty energy drink can toward her cart. It missed and rolled under a chair. "Oops, guess that's your problem now." She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She finished wiping the table, picked up the can, and placed it in her bin. Then she left, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft click. Back in the empty hallway, her hands trembled. Not from anger, but from something deeper. A quiet kind of resolve. She walked to the supply closet, put away her cleaning supplies, and stood there for a long moment in the dim light. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. Flipping to a fresh page, she began to write. Not a resignation letter, but something far more powerful. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that the woman they mocked every night wasn't just the cleaning lady, and tomorrow, everything would change. She didn't cry that night. Not because she wasn't hurt, she was, but because tears wouldn't fix anything. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table under the soft yellow glow of a single overhead bulb, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the city hummed in its usual rhythm. Distant sirens, the occasional car rolling down the street, the faint thump of bass from a neighbor's apartment. But inside, everything was still. Quiet. Focused. Her daughter was already asleep in the next room, textbooks stacked neatly on her desk, a highlighter still uncapped beside a page of notes. She'd worked late at her part-time job at the library, came home exhausted, and still studied until her eyes wouldn't stay open. That sight alone gave her strength, because this wasn't just about her. It never had been. She opened her notebook, the one with the worn blue cover she'd bought at a dollar store 2 years ago. Inside weren't grocery lists or to-do reminders. Instead, page after page held notes about property values, lease agreements, tenant rights, and investment strategies. Next to them were screenshots of emails, meeting minutes, and financial statements, all printed, highlighted, and annotated in her neat, looping handwriting. This notebook was her secret weapon, and tonight it was time to use it because what no one at that gleaming high-rise knew was that the woman they laughed at while tossing trash on the floor actually owned something far more valuable than their corner offices or fancy job titles. 2 years ago, after her husband passed unexpectedly, she'd received a life insurance payout. Modest, but enough to change everything if used wisely. While others might have spent it on a vacation or a new car, she'd done something quieter, smarter. She'd bought into a small real estate group that managed commercial buildings downtown, not as a passive investor, but as a silent partner with growing influence. And over time, through careful decisions and relentless learning, she'd gained controlling interest in the very company that held the master lease on the tech firm's building. It wasn't luck. It was strategy. It was late nights studying zoning laws. It was calling brokers on her lunch break. It was saying no to new shoes so she could say yes to a down payment. And now that patience was about to pay off, not for revenge but for respect, she picked up a pen and began to write. Not in anger, but with clarity. Her letter was calm, direct, and firm. She outlined what had happened, not just that night, but the pattern of behavior she'd witnessed for months. She didn't name names or quote exact words. She didn't need to. She simply stated the facts. Repeated disrespect toward building staff, violation of basic workplace dignity, and a culture that allowed mockery to pass as humor. Then she added what would happen next. She wouldn't storm in shouting. She wouldn't demand apologies on bended knee, but she would make sure that from now on, everyone in that office understood who really held the keys, not just to the building, but to the standards of how people should be treated within it. By the time she finished, the sky outside had begun to lighten. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in a manila envelope, and set it on top of her work bag. Then she stood, stretched her stiff shoulders, and walked to the window. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled down the avenue. A street sweeper hissed as it passed. Somewhere, someone else was starting their day. Maybe another cleaner, another cook, another bus driver. Doing work that kept the world turning, even if no one noticed. She thought about calling in sick. She almost did. But then she remembered her daughter's face when she talked about wanting to be a social worker, about helping people who felt invisible. "You already do that, Mama," she'd said once out of nowhere. "You just don't know it." So she showered, dressed in her usual uniform, and headed out the door. But this time, something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just showing up to clean. She was showing up to reclaim her place, not as someone to be ignored, but as someone who mattered. At the building, she went through her routine like always. But her eyes were sharper now. She noticed things she used to tune out. The way the receptionist ignored the security guard's greeting, how the mailroom staff ate lunch alone in the stairwell, how the maintenance crew was never invited to company events even though they fixed the Wi-Fi and unclogged the sinks. These weren't small things. They were signs of a deeper problem, one she was now in a position to address. That afternoon, while the office buzzed with meetings and coffee runs, she slipped into the property management office on the 3rd floor, a space most tenants didn't even know existed. The manager, a woman she'd known for years, looked up in surprise. "You're here early." "I need to file something official," she said, handing over the envelope. "And I need it delivered to the CEO's desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow, with a copy to HR and the Building Oversight Committee." The manager hesitated, then opened the envelope. Her eyes widened as she read. You're her?" She nodded. "I've been her all along." The manager exhaled slowly, then smiled. Not out of pity, but respect. "I'll make sure it's seen." That evening, as she cleaned the same conference room where she'd been mocked just hours before, she moved differently. Not with resentment, but with purpose. She wiped the whiteboard clean, straightened the chairs, and even fluffed the throw pillows on the sofa. Not because she had to, but because this space, like every space in this building, belonged to people who deserved better. Including her. When she left that night, she didn't take the service elevator. She walked through the main lobby, head high, past the glass doors and into the cool night air. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. She felt ready. Tomorrow she wouldn't come in with a mop and bucket. She'd come in with a plan, and this time they'd all be the ones watching her walk in, not as the cleaning lady, but as the person who held the power to change everything, and she wouldn't waste it on anger. She'd use it to build something better, for herself, for her daughter, and for every person who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Monday morning arrived with the usual rush, suits zipping past coffee carts, heels clicking on pavement, the low hum of a city shaking off sleep. But inside the high-rise, something felt off. The air was tense like before a storm. People whispered in clusters near the elevators. Someone had heard a rumor over the weekend. The building owner was coming in for an emergency meeting. No one knew why. The CEO had sent a terse email the night before. "All department heads, please report to the main conference room at 10 a.m. sharp. Attendance is mandatory." By 9:45, the room was filling up. Expensive shoes tapped nervously on the polished floor. Laptops were opened but untouched. A few tried to joke it off. Did someone finally break the espresso machine? But the laughter sounded thin, forced. Even the usual chatter about weekend plans had dried up. Everyone could feel it. Something big was about to happen. At exactly 9:58, the door opened. She walked in alone, but she wasn't wearing her uniform. Instead, she wore a tailored charcoal suit, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. Her hair was braided neatly down her back, and she carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm. Her steps were calm, deliberate. She didn't rush. She didn't glance around for approval. She just walked to the head of the table and set her folder down with a soft thud that somehow silenced the room completely. For a long moment, no one spoke. Some stared in confusion. Others squinted, trying to place her. Then it hit them. The woman standing before them was the same one they'd seen mopping floors, emptying bins, quietly slipping through the office after hours. But now she carried herself like someone who belonged at the front of the room, like someone in charge. One of the junior executives leaned over and whispered, "What's she doing here?" She heard it. Of course she did. But she didn't react. Instead, she waited until everyone was seated, then looked around the table with steady eyes. "My name is Evelyn Thorne," she began, her voice clear and calm. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. "And I'm the principal owner of Horizon Property Group, the company that holds the master lease on this building." A few people exchanged glances. Others shifted in their seats. The CEO, a man known for his booming voice and expensive cufflinks, cleared his throat. "Ms. Thorne, we weren't expecting you. Is there an issue with the lease?" She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply opened her portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. "There's no issue with the lease, but there is an issue with how people are treated inside these walls." Silence. She let it hang for a beat, then continued. "For the past 3 years, I've worked nights in this building, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand it. I wanted to see how tenants treated the people who keep this place running. The cleaners, the security guards, the maintenance crew, the ones who fix your lights, haul your trash, and wipe up your spills while you're too busy to notice." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "What I saw wasn't just careless. It was disrespectful. It was dehumanizing. And last Thursday night it crossed a line. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. I was mocked," she said plainly, without anger, without drama. "Imitated. Treated like I wasn't worthy of basic courtesy. And I know I wasn't the only one. This building employs over 30 service staff. How many of you know their names? How many have ever asked how their day was?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Then she leaned forward slightly. "Horizon Property Group doesn't just own this building. We set the standards for who gets to operate here. And those standards include how you treat every person who walks through these doors, regardless of their job title." The CEO finally found his voice. "Look, if someone said something inappropriate, I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. We'll address it internally." She shook her head gently. "It's not enough to address it internally. Culture doesn't change with a memo. It changes with action." She reached into her folder again and handed out printed packets. "Starting today, this company will undergo a full workplace culture audit, conducted by an independent firm specializing in equity and inclusion. All staff, yes, including leadership, will complete mandatory training on bias, dignity, and professional conduct. And by the end of the month, we'll launch a new advisory panel, made up of building service staff. They'll have direct input on tenant behavior policies and the right to flag concerns without fear of retaliation." One of the executives blurted out, "You can't force us to do that. We have a lease." She met his eyes without flinching. "Actually, I can. Section 7.3 of your lease agreement gives Horizon the right to enforce conduct standards that affect the building's operational integrity and community environment, and repeated disrespect toward essential staff. That qualifies." The room went still again. The CEO's face had gone pale. He'd signed that lease himself. He remembered skimming that section, assuming it was just boilerplate language about noise complaints or fire drills. He never imagined it would be used like this. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply closed her folder and stood. "This isn't about punishment. It's about accountability. You run a company that prides itself on innovation and disruption. But real innovation starts with how you treat people, especially the ones you think you don't need to see." Then she added, almost gently, "I gave you the benefit of the doubt for a long time. I hoped you'd figure it out on your own. You didn't, so now I'm stepping in, not as your cleaner, but as your landlord, and as someone who believes everyone deserves to work with dignity." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, and those of you who were in the conference room last Thursday? You'll receive individual notices later today. Your probation terms include 40 hours of community service alongside frontline workers, janitors, food servers, transit operators. And your performance bonuses this quarter will be redirected to a scholarship fund for children of service industry employees." She didn't wait for a response. She walked out, her heels clicking softly on the floor, not loud but steady. Behind her, the room remained frozen, stunned into silence. In the hallway, the receptionist from the front desk stood wide-eyed, having overheard everything through the slightly open door. She gave a small, awed nod. Evelyn returned it. Not with triumph, but with quiet solidarity. Down in the lobby, the security guard, who'd nodded at her for years without ever learning her name, stood a little straighter when he saw her. For the first time, he said, "Good morning, ma'am." She smiled. "Good morning." And as she stepped out into the sunlight, she didn't feel like she'd won a battle. She felt like she'd finally been seen, not for the uniform she once wore, but for the person she'd always been. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they started right away. By Tuesday afternoon, notices were posted in the break room and emailed to every employee, not in corporate jargon, but in plain language. Effective immediately, all staff will participate in a workplace culture review. This includes listening sessions with building service personnel, anti-bias training, and new guidelines for respectful conduct. There was no room for debate. The tone wasn't angry. It was firm, like a teacher setting boundaries for a class that had forgotten its manners. At first, some people grumbled. A few joked in hushed tones about HR gone wild or the cleaning lady's revenge. But those whispers faded fast, because the moment the training sessions began, something unexpected happened. People actually started listening. The facilitator wasn't some distant consultant with a PowerPoint full of buzzwords. She was a woman who'd worked as a hotel housekeeper for 20 years before becoming an advocate for service workers' rights. She didn't lecture. She told stories about being asked to clean a room while guests changed clothes without closing the bathroom door, about being handed used tissues like it was normal, about smiling through humiliation because rent was due, and when she asked, "How would you feel if that was your mother? Your sister? Your child?" The room got very quiet. One of the junior executives, the one who'd tossed the energy drink can, sat with his arms crossed at first. But halfway through, he excused himself and didn't come back. Later, he was seen in the hallway talking to the night shift custodian, not with pity but with real curiosity. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "What's the hardest part?" The custodian, surprised but not suspicious, answered honestly. They talked for 10 minutes. It was the first real conversation they'd ever had. Meanwhile, the advisory panel began to take shape. Evelyn made sure it wasn't just a token gesture. She met with the building service staff herself, janitors, security guards, HVAC technicians, and asked them what they wanted to see change. One woman said she wished people would stop leaving food waste in recycling bins. Another said he hated how tenants acted like he was invisible when he fixed the elevators. A third just wanted a place to sit during breaks that wasn't the stairwell. Within weeks, a small lounge was set up on the third floor, just a few comfortable chairs, a microwave, a fridge, and a bulletin board where staff could post notes or birthday wishes. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. And for the first time, they didn't have to eat lunch hiding in a closet or standing in the rain. The probation terms for the executives involved in the incident were carried out without fanfare. They showed up at a local community kitchen on Saturday mornings, chopping vegetables, washing dishes, and serving meals alongside people who'd worked those jobs for years. At first, they were awkward, unsure where to stand or what to say. But by the third week, one of them was laughing with the kitchen manager over a pot of burnt rice. Another stayed late to help mop the floors without being asked. Back at the office, something subtle began to shift. People started saying good morning to the cleaning crew. Someone put up a sign near the coffee station. "Please rinse your mug. Our team works hard and we can help them by cleaning up after ourselves." It wasn't enforced. It just stuck. Even the CEO changed. He didn't apologize in a grand speech. Evelyn hadn't asked for that. But he started showing up early on Fridays to walk the building with the head of maintenance, asking questions, learning names. He even invited the night shift staff to the company's holiday party for the first time, not as an afterthought, but with real invitations and reserved seating. Evelyn watched all of this not from a distance, but from within. She still came by occasionally, not to clean, but to check in. She'd sit in the new staff lounge with a cup of tea, listening more than speaking. She never acted like she'd saved anyone. She simply made space for people to treat each other like humans again. One afternoon, a young intern approached her nervously in the hallway. I wanted to say thank you," she stammered. "Before all this, I didn't even think about the people who kept this place running. I was so focused on my own stuff I didn't see anyone else. But now I do," Evelyn smiled. "That's all anyone really wants, to be seen. The real test came 3 months in, A new tech startup signed a lease on the 12th floor. On their first day, one of their employees snapped at a security guard for taking too long to check his ID. Word got back to the advisory panel by lunchtime. By 2 p.m., the building manager had met with the startup's leadership. By 4 p.m., the employee had apologized, not just to the guard, but in a team meeting with his colleagues. And by the end of the week, the entire startup team had signed up for the next round of culture training, voluntarily. That's when Evelyn knew it wasn't just about one company or one incident. It was about setting a standard that could spread. She never fired the CEO. She didn't need to. He stayed on, humbled but committed. The company's turnover rate, which had been climbing, actually dropped. Employees reported feeling more connected, more respected. Even the service staff noticed the difference. One cleaner said, "Now when I walk in, people look me in the eye. They say my name. That's worth more than a raise." And Evelyn, she kept investing. She bought another building downtown, then another. Each time she included the same clause in every lease. Respect for service staff isn't optional, it's part of the agreement. She also started a small mentorship program, helping other workers, bus drivers, cafeteria cooks, warehouse staff, learn how to navigate property ownership, financial literacy, and community advocacy. She didn't do it for fame. She didn't give interviews or post about it online. She did it because she remembered what it felt like to be treated like you didn't matter, and she refused to let that be the norm. One evening, as she stood by the window of her new office, simple, sunlit, with a view of the city she now helped shape, her daughter called. "Mom," she said, voice full of pride, "my professor used your building as a case study today. He said it's one of the few places where equity isn't just a word on a poster." Evelyn didn't say much. She just smiled, watching the sunset paint the skyline gold. "Tell him it's not about buildings," she said softly. "It's about people." And in that moment she knew the real work wasn't in firing a boss or holding a meeting. It was in changing hearts, one good morning, one clean coffee mug, one act of decency at a time. 6 months after that quiet Monday morning meeting, the building felt different. Not in the way you could measure with numbers, but in the way you could feel it in your bones. The air was lighter. Conversations in the hallways didn't stop when the cleaning crew walked by. People held doors open. Someone even started a small thank you board near the service elevator where employees could leave notes for the night staff. Simple things like, "Thanks for always making the kitchen spotless," or "You're the reason this place feels like home." No one made a big deal out of it. It just became part of the rhythm. The tech company that once treated service workers like background noise now had a rotating shadow day program, where employees spent a few hours walking in the shoes of the people who kept the building running. One marketing manager spent an afternoon with the HVAC technician, crawling through maintenance tunnels to fix a faulty vent. Another joined the evening cleaning team, pushing a cart through silent offices, learning how long it really takes to disinfect a single workstation. They didn't do it for credit. They did it because they finally understood. This place didn't run on code or coffee alone. It ran on people, real, tired, often overlooked people, who showed up every day with dignity, even when no one noticed. Evelyn still came by sometimes, though never in a suit anymore. She preferred comfortable slacks and a soft sweater, the kind you'd wear to a PTA meeting or a weekend market. She'd sit in the staff lounge with a thermos of tea, listening more than speaking. She never acted like she owned the place because to her, ownership wasn't about control. It was about responsibility, and she took that seriously. One rainy Thursday, she found herself mopping a spill near the lobby entrance, not because she had to, but because the regular cleaner was out sick and the front desk was swamped. A delivery person slipped on the wet tile just as she finished, and without thinking, she reached out to steady him. "You okay?" she asked. He looked up startled, then recognized her. "Oh, ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." She waved it off. "Happens to the best of us. Just watch your step." He nodded, then paused. You're the owner, right? Of this whole building?" She smiled faintly. "I am. And you're mopping the floor?" "I used to do it every night," she said simply. "Old habits stick." He stood there for a moment, then said something that stayed with her. "My mom cleans offices downtown. She says most places treat her like furniture, but she heard about this building, said it's the only place where people say her name." Evelyn didn't reply right away. She just wrung out the mop, her throat tight. That was the real victory. Not the lease agreements or the policy changes, but the quiet moments when someone's mother felt seen. Word of what happened in that high-rise began to spread, not through viral videos or news headlines, but through word of mouth. Other building owners started asking questions. How did you get tenants to actually respect staff? Is that culture program something we could adapt? Evelyn never charged for advice. She'd meet over coffee, share what worked, and always end with the same line. Start by learning their names. Everything else follows. She also quietly funded a scholarship, small at first, just enough for one student per year, but it grew. It was for children of service workers, janitors, bus drivers, cafeteria staff, anyone who kept the city moving while others slept. The only requirement? That the student believed in treating people with kindness no matter their title. Her own daughter was now in her second year of college, studying community development. She'd started a campus group that partnered with local service unions, organizing workshops on workers' rights and dignity in labor. When Evelyn asked her why she chose that path, her daughter just shrugged. Because someone taught me that the people who clean the floors are just as important as the ones who sign the checks. Meanwhile, the advisory panel became a model for other commercial buildings in the city. Tenants began competing, not for the fanciest lobby or fastest elevators, but for the highest staff satisfaction scores. One company even redesigned their office layout to include a dedicated break room for service personnel, complete with lockers and charging stations. It wasn't charity. It was common sense, and it worked. Evelyn never sought the spotlight. She turned down interviews, declined speaking invitations, and never posted about her work online. She didn't need applause. What mattered was that the night shift security guard could walk into the office kitchen and grab a coffee without being asked, "Are you lost?" That the woman who emptied trash bins could sit in the lounge during her break without feeling like she was intruding. That dignity wasn't a perk for the powerful. It was the baseline for everyone. One evening, as she stood by the window of her modest apartment, same kitchen table, same worn notebook now filled with new plans, she thought about how far things had come, not just in the building but in herself. She'd once believed her worth was tied to how quietly she could disappear. Now she knew her strength came from standing firm, not shrinking away. The next morning she got a call from the property manager. "We've got a new tenant moving in next week, a nonprofit that supports homeless youth. They specifically asked for our building because of the culture here." Evelyn smiled. "Tell them they're welcome, and make sure their service staff gets the same respect as everyone else." "Always," the manager said. "Because of you." "No," Evelyn replied gently. "Because of all of us, and that was the truth." This wasn't a one-person story. It was about what happens when people choose to see each other, not as roles, but as humans. When a CEO learns to say thank you to the person who mops his office. When a junior employee stops tossing trash on the floor because he finally understands the weight of someone else's labor. When a whole building decides that respect isn't optional, it's essential. Evelyn kept investing, kept listening, kept showing up. Not for power, but for purpose. And every time she walked through those glass doors, she did so knowing that real change doesn't come from dramatic speeches or viral moments. It comes from small, steady acts of decency, repeated day after day until they become the norm. And in a world that often rewards noise, her quiet strength spoke louder than any headline ever could.